Welcome back to Head Games. It's been a minute. TJ, good to see you. We are joined again this week by TJ. We miss you, Brett, but TJ is more than adequately filling in for you. So TJ Void, welcome back again, man. TJ's an educator, a podcaster. He's a coach. He's in Houston, although he just got back from Virginia. He also is a toddler.
I do.
TJ, what do you think about Chris Webber as a Hall of Famer?
Man, that's a wild question to start me off with. Over the years, I've come to really dislike Chris Webber for whatever reason. I don't really have a good reason, man. I thought he was the reason why the Kings teams were losing because I figured he should have done more in those playoff games. I'm a big proponent of if you're the best player, when it's time to be the best player, let's be the best player. Okay. Yeah. And Mike Bibby held those series down. However, if we're going to take the totality of basketball, right? High school, college, pros, Chris Webber is a Hall of Famer. There are worse guys in the Hall of Fame, less impactful guys in the Hall of Fame.
True that.
Right. Chris Webber, even though he probably isn't the heart of the Fab Five, he's the face of the Fab Five prior to Jalen Rose and his media ascent. Right. Jalen Rose's NBA career was long. Juwan Howard's NBA career was long. Shout out to my guy Ray Jackson, who I feel like should have been in the NBA personally, but I mean I'm biased. I'm cool with him like that. But Chris, when you think of Fab Five, you probably think of Chris Webber and the scowl, and then when you hear his story a little bit, it makes more sense. He may have been given a bad rap, just because of what people thought of him. We knew those guys were from the inner city, and we knew that Chris Webber went to a private school, but we didn't know the whole story, right? Yeah. So I've become more sympathetic to Chris Webber as I've gotten older. And obviously with maturity comes, a different level of appreciation for guys like, Chris Webber, Reggie Miller, who I also hated and I thought he sucked. I mean, obviously I was wrong, right? But I was a Michael Jordan guy, and I'm like, get Reggie Miller out of here. He's trash. But to answer your question, if Chris Bosh is a Hall of Famer, if Alonzo Mourning is a Hall of Famer, if Dikembe Mutombo is a Hall of Famer, if Mitch Richmond is a Hall of Famer, Chris Webber is a Hall of Famer. Yeah. If Paul Pierce is a Hall of Famer, Chris Webber is a Hall of Famer.
Yeah. I think the argument, the holistic argument is what gets him in, like you said, right? Like he's had a long and notorious, for a variety of reasons, career in basketball. And we got to remember, this is the Basketball Hall of Fame, right? It's not the NBA Hall of Fame.
That's where we lose it. That's where we lose
it. I think that's what gets him in. Traditionally, I'm for the NFL and for MLB, I'm if you have to think about it or debate it, he shouldn't be in kind of guy, typically. Right. But I think NBA is different because it is the Basketball Hall of Fame. That's right. Like it casts a wide net purposely. So for the reasons you mentioned, I think it's a good point. And also, look, he's had a big impact on the culture, if you want to put it broadly.
Right.
Like dudes weren't wearing high black socks until they started wearing high black socks. Dudes weren't wearing baggy shorts until they started wearing baggy shorts, right? They normalized these things in major college basketball, which it has had a long lasting impact.
Right. Because before them, baggy shorts were considered what Michael Jordan wore in the 80s. And if you go back and look, that's not baggy. Right. And those baggy shorts lasted for a very long time.
A long time.
I think people forget that the Fab Five started in 90, 91.
Yeah, man.
I think they just started wearing big baggy shorts maybe in 2010 or 11.
If that.
It lasted for a very, very long time. And black socks were not a thing. People your socks had to match your shoes. Yeah. Right. And typically you wore white or black, and even all black shoes like that weren't. You usually had to have team colors, man. So for that, man, I wouldn't be upset personally if the Fab Five as a collective were put in some sort of enshrinement into the basket. If we're gonna talk about Basketball Hall of Fame, I'm okay with the Fab Five being a part of the Basketball Hall of Fame. Because like you said, it's not the NFL, net football, professional football Hall of Fame or professional. It's the basketball. And as far as basketball goes, Allen Iverson, Showtime Lakers, Fab Five, like these are indelible
Yeah.
stamps in the basketball culture that still resonate today.
Yeah. I mean, Fab Five in some ways is like the nexus of the hip hop basketball sort of fusion being accepted by the mainstream, right? I mean, obviously that's happening long before the Fab Five comes along, but having it be that prominent and having little white Jewish guys like me growing up in the suburbs of Oakland, having a better understanding of that stuff, like those are seminal moments.
Absolutely. Well, just kind of moving into some news that we, looking at topics for the show. I came across an article, man, that was very, very interesting, especially considering the times we've been in within the last 2 or 3 years, right? And so the article was discussing how retired NFL players receive, the NFL is sued every day. There's numerous lawsuits out in terms of brain damage, cognitive function loss, and things of that nature. But there was an article that said that the players are receiving these rewards at disproportionate rates, to where white players are receiving them at a higher rate because there is a system in place where black players have to score lower because I read it and I wanted to say it correctly that black players start like their cognitive function is already assumed to be lower based on their average. And there was a phrase in there, man. First of all, that was shocking. The headline was shocking for me to read. I didn't even think about that. I thought everybody was getting screwed by the NFL, to be honest with you. Equally fucked. Equally. So there was a term in there that made it seem like this is normal. It's called race norming. And I've never heard of that, man. But you've been, having your doctorate and being in that field kind of, maybe you can explain to us what that means.
Yeah, I found this really interesting too. And the throwing around of a term like race norming, I think is kind of intentionally nebulous in some way, right? Because the NFL can just say like, oh yeah, this is what it is. Like just wave some hands over it and like, just trust us about this. Right. So if you dig a little bit deeper into it, the idea of norming something is looking at a big group of people and taking an average on some metric, some variable. So in this case, we're talking about, let's say, cognitive performance, whatever we want that to mean. So let's say we take a whole bunch of white players and a whole bunch of black players, and we take the average level of cognitive performance of all of them. We'd come up with two different numbers that would indicate their average level of cognitive performance. So they're assuming that after doing this norming, the two groups start at different places, that black players start with lower cognitive abilities than white players start with. So it's really just a fancy way of saying we compared these two groups using a lot of different people, a lot of different former players, a lot of different current players. And we've concluded that they're different in this way, which may or may not be true, right? It certainly is possible that they did the norming and the two groups were in fact different. It's not so much the use of norming that's by itself that's problematic. What's problematic is the conclusion based on that difference that the thing causing the groups to be different is their race, right?
Drawing that line.
Drawing the line,
exactly. White guys do this, right?
Exactly. So sure, we have two different scores, but it's a whole different story to go out and say, this is the reason the two groups differ from each other, right? Like it's just too simplistic. There's too many other reasons why former NFL players that are black, former NFL players that are white might differ from each other in cognitive performance that aren't related to their race.
Right. And that was my question. Like if it is, first of all, historically, there's more, black players make up a higher percentage of the NFL, specifically, over the last 20 years than white players, right? So there's a wider range of people to choose from, which essentially screws up the average because it's not condensed into these small set of people. Also, though, my question is if black players on average have a lower tip cognitive function score, why isn't that considered? Like, okay, these guys are on average scoring lower on this cognitive function test to start their careers or whatever the case may be. What factors go into that? Like, why is this the case? And attacking it from that angle as opposed to saying, oh, well, they just, these are just the average that we come up with.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean,
because there has to be a high, guys that are way above average, just how the law of averages work. There are guys that are way above average, and there's guys that are way below average. And
yeah.
if the floor is lower as a Black player, my question will be, why isn't that addressed?
Right.
Well,
I think probably because using these kind of norms as norming numbers as a guide to make decisions, whether it's about this or whether it's about something in medicine, which we'll talk about in a second, like it's just a lazy shortcut, basically.
Right.
It's a heuristic. It's a bias. It's like saying we can't measure all of the things that might factor into these two groups of players being different in terms of their cognitive abilities. Right. So the shortcut way of getting there is by saying it's race that's causing this, when in reality, it's race, it's socioeconomic status, it's the neighborhood they grew up in, it's the high school they went to, it's whether their parents were together, it's all this other shit that's really hard to capture. Right. And so because of that, and because race typically is correlated with all those other things, they take that one thing that's observable, race, and just say, okay, we're going to use this as the thing that's telling us about this difference.
And it's interesting that because you want to say, okay, norming is, we have to use something, right? There has to be some sort of baseline. But where it becomes problematic is that they're saying now, okay, because Black players are scoring lower to begin with, now they actually have to have a lower score when it's time to test their cognitive function as in terms of payouts. So if a white guy, is now scores, let's say, just give an easy number, 10 on this test, and then a Black guy scores 10, where the white guy started higher, so his decline was steeper, so he deserves the payout, as opposed to a guy who starts lower, he needs to score lower. Yeah. For me, I'm thinking, okay, if I started off at a 30 and now I'm at a 10, or I started off at a 32 and now I'm at a 10, the real conversation should be, why is there such a cognitive function drop off for a guy that's, some of these guys like Najee Davenport was one of the guys that was mentioned as, kind of the start of this. He's 42. Yeah. Like, this is a very young man that's having these drop offs. Not saying those aren't his numbers. I'm just saying these people are having cognitive function decreases, and now they're trying to say, well, that's not enough of a decrease. No, there's a decrease. That's the issue. That there's a decrease that isn't a normal for people their age to function at this lower capacity. Yeah. If they weren't football players. Yeah. And so that was my question. Like, why isn't it's just, oh wow, we have guys that are dropping, 15, 16, 17 points or percentage points or whatever the case may be. Why isn't that the discussion? Because even like for myself, I've been told as recent as 6 months that, Black men are more susceptible to kidney failure. So it's really, this is what my doctor told me, right? So really, it's just a matter of time before it happens. That's what I was told. A former athlete who's, fairly healthy, who's taking care of herself, who, yes, my family has a history of diabetes, but what they don't understand is that some of that stuff is type 2, right? That it was brought on by diet and, societal factors and things of that nature. There isn't a grocery store, that serves fresh food within, 15 miles.
Food desert. Yeah, exactly.
Food deserts and just, rural South Carolina, whatever the case may be. But that's what I was told. And so this kind of was triggering for me, because it's like, we just accept it though. As Black people, we often just accept that, like, Black people are more susceptible to heart disease. Right. Not realizing, like, wait, there's other things that has led up to this. Yeah. And I felt like that's kind of what's being said in this article, Yeah. And I guess if we're going to use that, like you said, like we're talking about, is that conclusion that, okay, since they start lower, they should score lower in order to get these, is that warranted? Is that a fair way to go about this?
She just opened, that's funny. She just opened the door. We can edit that out, obviously.
Real life.
Yeah, exactly. Reset. So no, the answer is no. It's not warranted to use that alone as the impetus to not reimburse or to not pay out these players as much as a group of white players. Again, it's just too overly simplistic, right? Like, the same kind of logic is used for the kind of medical decisions or medical advice that you're talking about. That's actually the root of the idea of norming, particularly of race norming, is that you take a group of any race and you just, if you boil it down to just that one factor, and then you see differences emerge between the groups, you can't base advice, particularly medical advice, but even financial stuff like the NFL, you can't base that on solely that one factor. I think that, again, is just where you really get into trouble, because there are just so many other things, like you mentioned in your example, that dictate people's life outcomes, right? Like there's a lot of shit that will determine whether or not you get kidney disease or whether I get colon cancer or something, right? Like, me being Jewish isn't enough to do it by itself. You being a Black man isn't enough to do it by itself. We have to take into consideration these other factors. Otherwise, it's just too overly simplistic. And I think the reality is the NFL just wants to save money, right? Like,
that's the reality,
most of the former players in these lawsuits are Black. If they feel like they can justify it with science somehow, they got to pay out less, right? And like that, unfortunately, I feel like is probably the bottom line.
Which is, kind of what racism kind of boils down to, right? Is that there's a system in place to make things disproportionate, and here's a justification for it.
Exactly.
Right? And so, and again, just extending it just a bit further before we get off the topic, is the way it kind of affects society as a whole is that these sort of overarching assumptions, or things that are present, like the sickle cell trait, in Black people that are historically higher, that could be used in other cases. Like you sent me another article where there were people who died in police custody, and because they had the sickle cell trait, they just said, oh well, they just had the sickle cell trait, so that's why he had a broken leg and was bleeding to death in the forest. You know what I'm saying? And it's just these things stacked on top of each other. Like, well, he shouldn't have ran. Well, he shouldn't have. When you look deeper and say, well, this was a misdemeanor, probation charge, and he was being hunted down with something that was really nothing. But then again, we talked about a few pods ago, man, the mistrust of Black people in the government and police entities, and now doctors. Black men don't like going to the doctor because our diagnoses when we go there is typically grim. Like, we don't go, it's rare that Black men go to the doctor and they leave and say, hey man, you are a picture of health. Thank God for you. Here, what are you doing? Let's share that with other guys. That doesn't happen. And like we talked about before, man, it's the last thing I'll say before I ask you our final question on this topic, is when we go to doctors, you have to actively search out African American doctors. Like, it's not something that just happens. And so that pool has to be increased so that these type of things, like the race norm, in order to decide payouts for NFL players who are historically Black in a higher percentage, that these guys, that there is a equal representation. It doesn't have to be 1-to-1 in terms of percentages, right? But that there's another voice to say, wait a minute, let's look at things that lead into this. But I guess now that we're saying that that's not a good way or a viable way to decide, to make these decisions, is there a better way?
I think that there's never going to be a perfect way, but you can at least better approximate the causes for these differences that we're talking about, whether it's in kidney disease or sickle cell or in NFL payouts, by at least accounting for, measuring some of these other factors, right? So there are medical systems, there are people way smarter than me out there who come up with these complex models of predicting somebody's likelihood of having cognitive decline after playing in the NFL, or coming up with the reasons why they might have experienced that. And it's just not, at this point in 2021, with all the tools that we have and all the measures that we can use, it's just not reasonable to boil it down to that one factor of race, because we know too much. There's too many studies looking at medical outcomes, at police outcomes, based on a variety of other factors. We just know too much now. So it's just unjustifiable to use just this one factor at this point, when we know there's so many other things that we could also be using. Right. And I would just say too, that like the things that you're talking about, the mistrust and the way that these arguments are used to rationalize this continued systemic oppression and systemic prejudice, these are literally the same things that have been happening in the world for hundreds of years, in our country for over 400 years, right? Like I'm reading Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi, which is a historical look at anti-Black prejudice and racism. Super fascinating, but literally these same arguments are the ones that he's talking about from 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago.
It's the same thing.
Same exact shit. So, I mean, you see the through line to this thing coming out from the NFL, which is just, it's both fascinating, not surprising, and fucked up at the same time.
And those were the exact gamut of my emotions. Like when I read it, it was like, wow, the headline. I sent it to you. I read the article and I'm like, this is messed up. I got to the end. Well, par for the course. And, you know, so moving on to another league, you know, that is really is kind of taking over the headlines at this point, man, the NBA. We've come down at the time of this recording. It's the last day of the NBA season, man. But before we even get into it, how do you think the season has gone? Seeing how weird it's been, how, you know, the seeding is all crazy, and how do you think this year has gone?
I would say the level of play, I think, has been generally pretty good. I've noticed, and I don't have a stat for this, I've noticed a lot more blowouts than I ever recall in the past. Certainly, you know, good close games happening as well. I've watched some really interesting, you know, excellent games, but I've also noticed a lot of like 30 to 50 point blowouts, more than typical. And maybe that can be attributed to injuries, guys resting, COVID issues, whatever. But I would say overall, what I've watched, which is a good amount, it's been interesting, entertaining. I think some new teams have emerged, which I know we'll touch on they don't get a ton of press, but I mean, at least they are having good records and kind of leading the top of their leagues, like especially the Suns and the Jazz come to mind.
Right.
So I'd say overall, given the state of the world as it's been going on, I'd say it's been pretty successful. What do you think?
I think the league did the best it possibly did. I think one thing I've learned coming away from this, which became like kind of a point of discussion amongst one of my friend groups, is that there are a lot of good basketball players out there because of COVID protocols and things of that nature. There was dudes in the league. The Rockets, I live in Houston. The Rockets will roll out teams on any given night. And I'm like, wait, who? What? Where did this guy come from? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. One of my favorite players, you know, that is, you know, I have some friends from both mine, so I kind of have an inside scoop on just his skill set. Is Mike James, that's now on the Brooklyn Nets. He's one of my favorite players, man. I'm glad he got his opportunity. But you see teams like the Warriors. I think this year has brought about a lot of good stories.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have necessarily the home court advantage necessarily outside of the travel. But it also shows you which teams have guys on their roster that take it seriously. Because there was a few guys who decided to go to strip clubs and now they're sitting out because of the protocols, you know, and thank God he ended up, you know, making it out. But you had guys in the Rockets that are getting into fights and all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah. And so I think this year was a little bit of a separator as well as an anomaly of, you know, who's the good teams, who aren't the good teams, who made good draft picks, who didn't. But it's also, like you said, teams like the Jazz, who's had the best record the whole year, and no one really cares because no one takes them seriously, right? Which leads us to our discussion, man, about, you know, let's talk about tiers of playoff teams, right? Again, at the time of this recording, we're still kind of scrambling to see what the play-in teams are going to be, things of that nature, which before we can get there, man, talk to me about what your thoughts is on the play-in aspect of the playoffs that's been implemented last year due to the bubble, and then they just carried over into this year.
I'm kind of a traditionalist typically in that these kind of expansions I don't typically love. So when Major League Baseball added another wild card, I was like, this is fucking stupid. But that being said, and also I think it has to do with sort of where your team falls, right? Like I'm a Warriors fan. Right. So this year, like I guess if we end up with the 8, which it looks like we beat Memphis, so we'll be the 8th seed, going into the play-in, like, okay, I can handle that, right? It's okay. Right. But at the same time, like in a normal year, we wouldn't have to go through this play-in bullshit, and we'd just be in and we'd be playing the 1 seed. So I think for the league, it's good because it engages more fan bases for longer. And I think obviously that's something we like to see. But the opposite side of that, for me at least, is like Western Conference is so deep, right? The 7 and 8 teams, potentially gonna be the Lakers and the Warriors. The Warriors aren't going to win it all this year, but they have Steph. He could go off anytime and beat anybody in any set of games, right? So I don't think it would be shocking if they ended up at the 8 and they're playing the Jazz as the 1. If they make it a series, I don't know if they'd win, but if they made it a series, right?
Right.
The East, I think, is a little bit different. The Wiz are playing well. They have Beal and Westbrook, but the rest of the bottom, really 5-ish of the East, are kind of shitty. Like nobody expects them to do anything. They don't matter. So I think that's the flip side, right? It's like it includes all these teams who really have no business being there.
Yeah. So for me, I asked my friends, and some of them, the pure basketball in us makes us say we hate it. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? You get the seed that you get. But if I can step back from being a basketball guy and just get put on my marketing hat for a second, it's accomplishing its goal. Yeah. I think the goals were to bring drama or meaningful games toward the end of the year because people were complaining about sitting players and things of that nature, which is magnified in the NBA as opposed to the NFL where you may have 2 games in 2 weeks. The NBA, you may have 9 games, in 2 weeks, trying to get guys ready for the playoffs. And maybe that causes the numbers to lag a bit because you've already kind of tuned out of the NBA because nobody's going to be playing that. And so maybe you come in, game 4, which, if you think about the David Stern era, when the first round was 5 games. Yeah. So if you come in game 4, you may have missed the whole series.
It's a wrap.
Yeah. So Adam Silver was there for that. And so he's thinking, well, we got to keep people engaged while we have. And so though I get the argument that the regular season should, predicate your seeding, that's fine, LeBron, but your team is still 7th. You know what I'm saying? Like they're still 7th. And so if you don't want to be in this position, then don't be in this position. And, they had injuries and things of that nature. But also, I think it gives basketball is such, the NBA has marketed itself by its players, not necessarily its franchises. And so this play-in tournament, specifically this year, even more than last year, when last year we were just like, oh, shoot, there's a play-in game. This year we've kind of built up to it. So you have young stars that can kind of stretch out their run, like, Ja Morant with the Grizzlies and DeJounte Murray with the Spurs and Bradley Beal with the Wizards and even LaMelo Ball with the Hornets. Yeah, they're in this playoff tournament. And so from a marketing standpoint, it's awesome. I may do this next year. But just like the NFL, where you play Saturday, Sunday, Thursday, Monday, like it's like
every day.
At some point, let's just go back to the traditional. You get what you get because you played this whole season. So I don't know if it'll be good. Shaq said this, and I kind of agree with him that this year it's fine. With 65. First of all, I think 65 games is perfect. If we can stretch it out over the entirety of the year, and still make it the length of the regular season, but 65 games, that's the perfect medium. I'll push 70. 82 is a lot. But I think that play-in game, man, but that leads us to, we talked about the differences between the East and the West. The East is kind of more of a clear picture. So here's the tiers that we came up with, right? Just 2 tiers, which is the true contenders, actual contenders, and the close, but not really. Yeah, like, nah, we see you, thanks for playing well.
Yeah, you're working.
Yeah, we see where you're going with it. But so tell me, who are your actual contenders in their Eastern Conference?
I have 2 actual contenders in the East, and it was tough, but not so tough. So the first top contender for me in the East is the Nets. I mean, I guess they just got these guys on the court together for the first time in how many months, right? If they have Harden playing like a point and not playing like selfish James Harden, give me the free throw line, which is another big if when you come to the playoffs.
Right.
If they have Kyrie paying attention, which is another big if.
Large, very large if.
You see what he just said, like yesterday or whatever?
Yeah. Yeah.
If they have KD not injured, which is maybe a big if, we'll see. He's still, probably the most talented scorer we've ever seen when he's right, even coming off the Achilles. So if they have those three guys going, focused, healthy, it's tough to see somebody in the East beating them. Yeah. That being said, I could see chemistry being an issue. It's one of our favorite topics just because these guys haven't played together, right? Like you can throw all the talent you want together, but there's only one ball. All these guys in their own way are somewhat ball dominant, especially Harden and Kyrie. KD can kind of get his however he gets his, but they're all somewhat ball dominant. And they certainly don't play a lick of defense. So that concerns me as well, which I think leads to my second Eastern contender. And then you can give me yours, which is Philly. And I don't like saying this because I don't like Embiid and I don't like Ben Simmons. And I think, I don't know what it is about them that rub me the wrong way. I actually don't hate Ben Simmons. Ben Simmons is growing on me because he plays good D. He's a great distributor. Embiid pisses me off just because I still think he shoots too many threes and he can be dominant. And then he sort of seems to just disappear and become nobody. So I don't know that you can trust Philly still. But I think they could give the Nets a run, especially if Embiid is on his shit. I don't know who from the Nets is going to D up Embiid inside.
Right. And I actually have the same two contenders. The Nets, just because they just have overwhelming talent. Like between those three guys, you can get 35 to 50 on any given night, right? However, I do agree that chemistry could be an issue only because, hoopers hoop, right? So you kind of figure it out. But at the NBA level, specifically in the playoffs, when you're playing one team consistently where they can just lock in, where they can hone in on your game plan, I think it will be difficult to figure out who does what when, which brings kind of like my second point of concern, which is the novice coach. I mean, Steve Nash was a good player. He's done well kind of navigating the ship so far. I think we found out that the way that James Harden played was probably more due to his coach and the system as opposed to James Harden's preference. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to allow me to shoot 747 shots a game, that becomes my preference.
Exactly.
Like, I prefer to do this. But like when it comes to just coaching, like is who gets the ball in the clutch? What play do you run? How do you make adjustments in the playoffs on top of the expectations that you're supposed to win, right? With the team who hasn't played together in months, who haven't had I think they said they've had their real true starting lineup for maybe 9 games or something like that this year.
That's crazy.
But then that brings my second point that their starting lineup is really small, right? Jeff Green is their 4, sometimes they're 5. And you have DeAndre Jordan, LaMarcus Aldridge retired. DeAndre Jordan is up in years. He's still in good shape, but that size, specifically against teams like the Sixers in the East, or if they get to the Lakers in the West, the Lakers are huge. They can put LeBron at the point and run a team out there where he may be one of their shorter guys. But the Sixers, I think the Sixers have what works for them is they have a proven coach, that they have a solid roster because they've added Seth Curry, who's a shooter, Danny Green, who's a shooter and 4-time champion. I believe 4. He has 4 rings. And then they had even Dwight Howard, who gets into way too many hand fights still, right? It's like, how do you not learn? Just, whatever.
Let it go. Yeah, let it go.
Let it go, dog. First of all, Udonis Haslem will probably put hands and feet on you. Let's just be honest about this.
Don't fuck with UD, all right? Don't fuck with UD.
No, you just leave him alone. Anyway, but my point of contention with them is, like you said, Embiid has a tendency to float at times. I think he gets a little too emotional. I do think that Doc Rivers has been really good for him, as well as Ben Simmons. But Ben Simmons, I think where they messed up in the first couple years that they weren't organized enough in the playoffs. So Ben Simmons would actually be on the baseline from a pure basketball standpoint, as opposed to playing his natural position, which his natural position is actually point guard. It looks crazy because he's huge and he can't really shoot, but also the problem, they get a lot of their points prior to the Curry and Green addition from inside. Like he's not going to shoot. He's going to get his point, and then where does that pushes Embiid to the perimeter. But for me, outside of their bench being kind of non-existent, the X factor in their run in the playoffs is Tobias Harris, because he's kind of the third. The third guy is the differentiator once you get to the competition, because your ones and twos sometimes cancel each other out unless you're 1 or 2 with Shaq and Kobe. You know what I'm saying? Which you're not gonna match those two, or shoot, even LeBron and AD, which we'll get to later. It's hard to cancel out those two. But when you get to that third guy, right, who wins that battle? And Tobias Harris cannot average 11 points a game. He just can't, right? He has to shoot the ball more. Because, I mean, if you remember 2 years ago, they had Harris, Simmons, Embiid, Jimmy Butler. But the Sixers don't have a point guard outside. When Ben Simmons sits down, who plays point? Shake Milton? Like Seth Curry? That's just the guy bringing the ball up. And traditionally, even if you don't have to necessarily set it up, you got to have a guy who's going to get you into the right set at the right time to do the right thing.
Yeah. He's calm. He can organize things when necessary. Yeah.
So those are I think we have the same contenders. So let's talk about our next tier, which is the close, but not really. Who's in that tier for you in the Eastern Conference?
For me in the East, and I'll start with the team that I think is closest to being in that actual contender tier, which is the Bucks. I think for them, adding Jrue Holiday is huge. He, I think, has the potential to take them to the next level. I still don't quite trust Giannis, honestly. Giannis. I just don't think he's proven it yet, that he's the dude when it comes to late in the game. And it seems that part of this is coaching, right? Too often they are putting him in like a 1-4 and telling him just to go. And he ends up with a shitty shot because that's not really his game. That's not how he gets buckets typically. So that still concerns me about them a little bit. That being said, I think they're a threat. I mean, I think they need to be taken more seriously than my second close but not team, which is the Heat.
Right.
Heat are almost there as like a legacy, just because I think they're hard to count out with Riley and Spo and Jimmy and the culture that we've talked about so much. You guys like UD, props for getting his first minutes of the season and getting tossed. I think it's hard to count them out. They have been playing better recently. So I think it's hard to count them out just because they've got that pedigree and they've got a bunch of dogs who are going to go out and play. Hero finally started shooting the ball better. So I don't really expect either of those teams. I mean, we'll see how the seeding shakes out in terms of making it to the conference finals, but I don't expect either of those teams to be real threats to win it all. The Bucks more so than the Heat, though. Who falls into your second tier in the East?
It's weird we have this because we didn't even discuss this prior to.
Yeah.
And I have the same too. The Heat, I put a notch above the Bucks because you got to respect the guys who made it, to the finals last year. And I'm a big Bam Adebayo fan.
Yeah, I didn't even say Bam.
I called him Bam Morris, which is running back. But we talked about the Heat culture before. We talked about I think that culture was actually enhanced when they brought on Trevor Ariza, because he kind of just falls right into place. I think Victor Oladipo would have helped him had he not gotten hurt, because that gives we saw Jimmy Butler just run out of steam last year. Yeah. And this year he's been kind of laying low. He's been hurt some. But I think they really, really benefited last year from the bubble. Not having to play on the road. Probably a little bit more motivated than some of the older guys. And they had elevated interest in actually going to the championship. Other guys were kind of elsewhere with their interest with everything going on. They have younger guys. So, they didn't have as many concerns as some of the teams that, have the families and they were in the bubble without their wife and kids and things of that nature. Tyler Hero was shipping in his IG girlfriend, God bless his heart, but that ain't the same as you not being without your 3 kids and your actual wife. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The Bucks, I do think that, first of all, I'm a huge Drew Holiday fan.
Yeah, same.
Right. But Drew Holiday also played on Pelican teams that got swept, unceremoniously. And I think PJ Tucker was a big addition because one of the things that hurt the Bucks last year was that their defensive stopper was DiVincenzo. And I'm not sure if he's the guy. No disrespect. I like Dante DiVincenzo, but I think PJ Tucker brings him a little bit, and he can hit a shot. Mm-hmm. My question with the Bucks is beyond the Giannis thing, which the Giannis thing is what it is. Like, once you get into in the playoffs, when the court shrinks, people hone in. You can't just go sprinting downhill, which is what makes me think that in the clutch he's kind of eliminated, because you can't run a set for him unless you're going to get him moving off a screen or something like that, and they're going to be pinched in on that. And then who you pitched it out to at the time, it was only Chris Middleton. I think now PJ Tucker can hit a corner three. I think Drew Holiday can get you a bucket when he needs to, if it's not clogged up. But I do think that the Bucks have holes that you only see in the playoffs.
Yep.
Right. So I'm not gonna put my trust in them quite yet until I see the two-time MVP, regular season MVP, do something worthwhile in the playoffs. But see, I added a tier that you didn't know about. This is just the happy to be there. This is the happy to be there.
Yeah.
Which is the New York Knickerbockers.
Your New York Knicks, baby.
They damn near put a billboard up so far because they just made it, right? But this is the mindset difference of teams, right? They're happy to be there. You got Knicks fans have been waiting for this forever because the Knicks, though they are a prominent sports franchise, they have sucked for a very long time. Okay.
John Starks
since the Allen Houston days.
Allen Houston, woo!
Yeah,
they're still paying him, right?
Which they should. Allen Houston was my guy, man.
He had a smooth ass shot.
He could play. Just I'm just gonna play. I'm gonna be here for about 12 years and then whatever. I'll move on to something else. But I'm really happy for Julius Randle, who I actually like. I don't like a lot of Kentucky Wildcats, but I do like Julius Randle. He's a Texas guy, so maybe I'm biased. But I also really like D Rose and watching the evolution of his game. Yeah, me too. To where he knows how to pick his spots and things like that. But they've already celebrated. So if they lose in the first round, fine. Yeah. But then who I feel is happy to be there should be the Celtics. They sucked all year. And it's been so disappointing to watch them play so poorly when it's like their players just don't fit together. Like they just don't mesh well. Jaylen Brown is out now. Jason Tatum plays well, but there's times that Jason Tatum is like, what? Why would you do that now? Or why do you only have 8 points, bro? What is going on? Or
then he gets 60.
Then that's what I'm saying. Or Marcus Smart, who I think is a great a glue guy. He's a good player, really good player, actually. Mm-hmm. But then there's times that he feels like he's supposed to be shooting. Or Kimba not being Kimba. Yeah. And it's just the Celtics have been a wild disappointment for me. Yeah. Right. And I think the other guys in the East are just, the Pacers. When everybody scores 140 on for whatever reason. And now that DeMontis Sabonis is hurt. I think that the Nets and Sixers are head and shoulders above just about anybody in the East, including the Bucks. Because for 7 games, I don't think the Bucks can just keep it up to that degree.
I agree.
Which we move on to the West now, which is a bit more convoluted, right? Yeah. Because the guys who's supposed to be the number 1 seed, the Lakers, are 7, 8, and you got the Warriors coming in there, and the Blazers coming in there. So talk to me about, again, talking about the tiers. Who are the actual contenders that you have in the West?
I will say that this, I think, to your intro, was much tougher to shake out than the East. Right. Like the East is clear. And we said this before, after 3, 4 in the East, it's like, whatever. Nobody cares about these guys. The top, or really the whole West is deeper, right? It's much deeper. It's much better. So my top 2 teams, actual contenders in the West, both reside in Los Angeles. And I don't love these picks. I'll start by saying that I don't love that being my top. And I think that, again, just underscores the kind of instability, but also depth that we see in the West. So obviously, if LBJ and AD are healthy, I think the Lakers have to be at the top of the West. Putting those two together in the playoffs, if healthy, they still can play at a ridiculously high level. Yep. We'll see what's up with Dennis Schroeder, see if he comes back. I think they actually do need him. Yep. We'll see how that shakes down. That's largely dependent on health, but if they're healthy, I think they have to be at or near the top. Mm-hmm. The Clippers I put in this tier as well, purely based on talent and purely based on the kind of fucked upness of the West this year. Like, right. If there was any year that they were going to be able to put it together and do it, PG's had a great year. Kawhi is as steady as always. They have a bit of depth. I think Rondo was actually a great pickup for them. Somebody to kind of organize and orchestrate things. We'll see if PG can continue to play well or if he reverts to playoff P. And I hope for his sake, I like PG. I like that he was honest about the shit he was going through in the bubble last year. So I hope that he can step up and play well in the playoffs. I still don't trust the Clippers though. Right. Like nothing would surprise me with them making it to the conference finals or losing the first round. Nothing would surprise me.
Nothing.
With the Clippers. So those are my top two. I don't feel good about it, but those are my top two.
Man, again, we did not discuss this beforehand, and I feel the exact same way. I picked these guys just because I had to. Like, who else are you going to pick in the West, honestly? I mean, the Lakers are the defending champions. You got to respect that. They have LeBron and AD. You got to respect that, which I have become less and less of an AD fan. It has nothing to do with his skills. Good player, right? But I call him the guy. Like every day, every game, like like he bumped his toe all the time. It's like, dude, come on, man. But also, I think the Drummond pickup is better than people think. I mean, he's a large body again, which will combat, the 76ers of the world who actually got Howard, who when a B goes out, he doesn't bring the offense, but it's another live body, another big body. But obviously, the things that can hurt the Lakers are injuries. If anybody gets hurt on that Lakers team, it's been proven that they are not nearly as good. Also, like, who are one of the other guys that's gonna step up? I mean, last year in the bubble, it was KCP who started off horrendous, like he was terrible. But in the finals, he was extremely valuable. Who does that this year? They don't have Rondo, which was key last year. They don't have Dwight Howard, which was key last year. They don't have JaVale McGee to throw in there for 6 fouls and 2 rebounds. That was key last year, right? And then the seeding, because they may have to play in this playing game, I think that gives the Lakers, at least allegedly, a harder path, right? Yeah. Because the teams they're going to face played well all season. And I think teams like believe it or not, teams like the Jazz, probably they don't match up person for person with the Lakers, but they match up scheme to scheme because they can play 5 out and they switch off screens and they have 4 guys that can score from the perimeter. And then a guy that can clean it up, because Rudy Gobert is defensive player of the year before, but he's actually not a great defender. We've talked about that before. But then the Clippers, right? The Clippers, you have to put them up there because you got to respect the roster. And I think the Rondo addition is huge for them. One thing they missed last year was they didn't know who to get the ball to at the right time. And they didn't have a guy who's going to tell them, hey, you guys are about to piss this opportunity away. You need to knock this stuff off. For real. And Rondo is that guy. He'll fight you behind it, which is fine, right? That's what you need from a leader. But obviously, the biggest hesitation is Paul George. You never know what you're going to get from Paul George. I don't understand. Skill-wise, not
incredible.
But he just picks the wrong time to have very bad games, and this has been historically his thing. It's like he gets caught up into the minutia that doesn't matter, and then he stokes the fire of killers like Dame Lillard. And why would you do that? You know what I'm saying? Or Luka, or guys like that they had no reason to lose last year, but yet they did. So I believe this year they kind of slid under the radar. But then from just a pure basketball standpoint, I think rebound is going to be an issue for them because who rebounds for them, right? Zubek. You know, the more the Morris twin has become more of a perimeter guy, which he's shooting, I think, 47% from three this year.
He's banging them.
The
whole team bangs threes. I mean, that's the thing. If they shoot well and they can rebound just a little bit, they have a good shot.
I think Shamet has to play well, but I think the last thing that kind of gives me pause with the Clippers is obviously a younger coach. He's not a newer coach, but that pressure can be a gift and a curse. It can be a sense of urgency, or it can do to Paul George what it typically does to Paul George, and make him completely crumble. Which you could look at the numbers and say his numbers are solid, but I test. So then we have the close but not category, which I think this is where we may differ a little bit. Who do you have in that category?
So I lumped two teams together at the top of this category. Maybe not at the top. I lumped two teams together. I put the Jazz and the Suns kind of in the same bucket. As being really good regular season teams, but they sort of have the look of the classic really good regular season team. Let's see what happens when we get to the playoffs type team. I don't want to disrespect either. I think the Jazz, as you just said, have actually a really excellently constructed top to bottom roster. So I almost say, similar to what I said with the Clippers, nothing would surprise me with the Jazz. Like if they go on some kind of run because they're shooting 50% from three and they're getting contributions from everywhere and Rudy's protecting the rim, like I could see that happening. I could also see somebody coming in hot, whether it's Steph and the Warriors or somebody else coming in hot as the 8 seed and at least giving them a run for their money. The Suns, I think they're a year ahead really of their kind of true time to contend.
Right.
We'll see what happens with CP3 next year. If he's still kind of playing at this level, he's been incredible all year. His presence with Devin Booker obviously has been great. Ayton seems to be developing nicely. So I think they have some guys, but they, to me, have the truest look of like a regular season 50+ win team. Right. The lights are going to be bright when you get to the playoffs. We'll see what all these young guys do. So CP3 is going to be fine, but let's see what all these young guys do. The other team that I have there in that same tier, and this is actually really disappointing, is the Nuggets, because I love watching Nikola Jokic play. He plays at his own speed. He does his own thing, but he's an incredible passer. Love fucking rainbow threes are amazing.
Rec League All-Star.
Yeah, Rec League All-Star. So this is disappointing to me just because of Murray's injury. I'm not actually a huge Murray guy, but I think having him puts them in at least knocking on the door of that top tier because they've been playing really well, even in his absence. So it's disappointing that they're not up higher because he got hurt. But I could still see them doing some damage just because I do think they still have a pretty good roster, and the Joker has been playing at an incredibly high level all year.
Which is what puts them in my close but category because Murray brings that explosive scoring ability that you need in the playoffs. You need a guy who can give you that oh crap performance, like turn it on. Klay Thompson's going for 60 or something crazy. You need that, right? Just to kind of offset just the grind and the back and forth that the playoffs presents. But I feel like I actually put them and the Blazers together, the Nuggets, because they always seem to be like one play or player away.
Yeah.
Like just one guy. They both have MVP caliber players, and Jokic for the Nuggets and Lillard for the Blazers. They both have capable scorers, and even Carmelo, but McCollum, Lillard, and then the Nuggets have Jokic, and they have MPJ with Michael Porter Jr., who can at any given moment score 30. But they both rely heavily on scoring, right? And they rely heavily on everybody being available. The Blazers have never played a playoff series where everyone was healthy. Never. They always have a big guy hurt. I feel like their big man, his name escaped York, Nurkic, who he's just not the same, man. He's not the same, and it's like it's visible. I think the loss of Trevor Ariza hurt them. Even though Carmelo's been playing well, they've had some guys who've done some good things. They're always like just one guy away, and they're really relying on their guards to explode off the dribble and make those points. And they don't have anybody to slow things down with. Which Carmelo is that guy. He was that guy historically, right? Top 10 scorer ever. But at this point, I think they're just a player. Them and the Nuggets are both just a player, perhaps away. As some of these guys, like the Carmelo Anthony's and the Millsap, on the back end of their career, they don't have that guy that's just going to get the ball and get busy, right? But then I also put the Jazz in there as well, because I just don't trust them. I put them there only because they play well, because of their offensive distribution. And Jordan Clarkson has played well. I don't trust Rudy Gobert at all in a playoff series for sure. And really, honestly, the reason why I put them there is because they could just run into unfavorable matchups just because of how things are flipped in the West. Yeah. I mean, if they play the 8th seed, they're playing the Golden State. And if Golden State makes it through the play-in portion, if they play the 7th seed, they're potentially playing the Lakers. And it's just like, you're not going to win either one of those, which take the Suns and bump them down to my happy to be here moment. Which CP3 may see this and hate my guts for the rest of my but CP3 is my man. And if CP3 does watch this, I hope he reposts it, because that's just more out on our podcast, but whatever. But I think outside of Chris Paul, they didn't expect to go to the playoffs. Chris Paul was the accelerator. You know what I'm saying? But those guys, then they were close last year, close-ish. Yeah. But I think that this is like they're okay. This is when the light bulb come on, but that light bulb was turned on by Chris Paul. You know what I'm saying? So if Chris Paul isn't there, Chris Paul's in year 15 or 16, and he's still playing this high level. But I think they're just happy. They didn't plan on being in the playoffs this year, let alone being the 2 seed. Yeah. So I think that they're kind of happy to be there. I don't think there's no real disappointment. You know what? I changed that. There's a disappointment in the West. And that disappointment for me is the Pelicans. You have 2 All-Stars. Two. You can't crack the playoffs? Come on, man. In my Jim Rome playoffs.
Playoffs?
You can't, just get there. Just get in the play-in. You can't even get in the play-in. Like, the NBA has set this up, Zion, to where you have an opportunity to miss the playoffs and not miss the playoffs.
Yeah.
And you missed them both. God, that's disappointing.
Let me ask you, what do you think about what's your take on Zion? Like, he's unquestionably athletically gifted. He's an incredible player. Like, is he a guy you want to build your team around? I have my answer to this question, but I'm curious. You know more about basketball than me. I'm curious about your answer.
My honest answer, I don't know. I still think that he has got to lose weight. He's never going to be healthy. My wife is a physical therapist, so she watched him walk, and she just cringes whenever he walks, because she's like, his gait that's just not sustainable. But even when I took her through like highlights, she's like, well, most of his explosion is just boom, boom. It's not really cutting hard, boom. And she said, if he ever does that, it could be over, right? Yeah. But Zion has proven to be better than I thought he was. Mm-hmm. I think Zion's biggest trait is, I call it the Shaq factor. Because Shaq, if Shaq elbowed you and you went, he was like, I got it. And that's what Zion does. He puts that shoulder on you, and those guys are like, oh, this hurts way more than I thought it would. And so you see guys kind of backing up now, where now a jab step, you got to go for it. But eventually, you're going to have to learn to expand your game. But I am a proponent of do what works. We can work on the other stuff later, but do what works. But I don't think that his skill set right now, as we speak, even though statistically awesome, I don't think that you can build your team around that. Only because if you build your team around that, then you can't build anything else in your team. And I think Stan Van Gundy putting him at point guard sounded cool, looked awesome. If you were playing NBA 2K, that is not going to work for real. That's not going to work for real. You have a point guard, which is Lonzo Ball is point guard because he didn't even want to shoot. You know what I'm saying? He wants to set up the team. He wants, like, things he does is real point guard-esque. Like, I'm going to just get the ball and pass it ahead, then I'll come back. I think Lonzo's thing is just a confidence thing, which I think that LaMelo going crazy. So had Lonzo say, wait a minute. You know, that's my little brother. So let me be more assertive. But
he's actually had a better, he's had a good year, Lonzo.
He has. But I think
he changed his shot. He's shooting better from three.
There's too many guys on the Pelicans that just like, they're too cool.
Exactly.
They're too cool for everything. You know what I'm saying? But what do you think about Zion? Do you feel like you can build a team around him?
I get the same vibe as you, man. I mean, I think I keep saying, like, it's what, 2-3 years until his body breaks down. Like, he has to change his body. I mean, I think that has to be first, right? Like, he's always gonna be a big dude,
right?
And you can be a big dude and be fit and be more durable, hopefully,
right?
And be able to do some more things. But I think to your wife's point, she made a good observation. Like, everything is vertical. Right? Like, he has no horizontality, no wiggle in his game, which is fine. Like you said, you do what works, but that can only last for so long. And do you want to build your team around, in the West, especially, around a one-trick pony? Zion gets buckets one way. He gets buckets down low because he's fucking big,
right? And
he's quick. He's super quick off the bounce. His second bounce is super
jump.
quick.
Yep.
Unreal, right? So he can always get buckets that way, but he's not always going to have that quick second bounce, especially if he doesn't get his body right.
Right.
So I think for me, that's the hesitation too. Watching him, he's awesome to watch, but, like, I would have hesitation if I'm doing a top 15 draft of guys I want to build my team around for the next 5-10 years. I don't know if he's in my top 10 even.
And if we're being honest, his explosion is from high school to college was one thing, and then from college to the NBA has been a significant drop off.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens, man. I wish the best. He's from South Carolina. I have a soft spot from anybody from South Carolina, because that's where I'm originally from. I'm from Texas, but that's where I was born, and that's where my family's from. So I want him to do well, man. But he has got to, and he's young, he's young. He's got to figure out a way to trim off some of that weight, man, to extend his career. Yeah, man. Well, TJ, I think we solved all the world's problems as always. I think so. We do you want to make a bold prediction for the NBA champ, or you don't have that in you? Bold prediction, not so bold prediction, will be the Lakers if they're healthy. Yeah. I don't really see a way for them to win, but I don't see a way for them to lose. My dark horse, it's not the Clippers actually, but my dark horse is probably in the East, which that's always a dark horse, right? But so my dark horse, if I'm looking through the bracket, my dark horse would be, which is not that dark of a horse, but would be the Nets. But a lot of things got to go right for the Nets to win. But I just think they have so much firepower, man. That chemistry be damned. Like, we can put the ball in the bucket. Kyrie can play at the 2, which is where he's way more comfortable. He's never been a point guard. He just dribbles the best. Yeah, exactly. Got the best handle. Right. And he's short, but he's looking to score, which is fine. Because James Harden is best when he facilitates first and then scores off of that. And then they have, to me, the most unguardable offensive weapon that I've ever seen, which is Kevin Durant. Yeah. So I think that those three are enough to give them a chance if they don't just lose it completely. Do you have a prediction? I would lean towards the same, man. It's hard to say. If the Lakers are healthy, they're not going to repeat. I don't really like anybody. That's the thing. It's there's a lot of mediocrity, man.
There's a lot of mediocrity this year. I think that's what's unique is, like, last year we're like, yeah, obviously the fucking Lakers are going to win. They got LeBron and AD both playing at this level, right? And years past, it was like the Warriors are incredible. It seemed like foregone conclusion. And this year, I just don't think it isn't. Maybe we'll get to see some interesting, exciting stuff because of that. And we can only hope. I mean, this is, some people say this is the best time of the year, NBA playoffs every night. for the next couple months. So we'll have some fun stuff to talk about.
Definitely. We're here for it.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you all for listening. Don't forget to rate and subscribe where applicable. You can find us on Twitter at HeadGamePsych. I'm on Twitter at BD Rosenberg, PhD, and this dude is on Twitter at TJ Void. Thanks again.